to run through our opening introduction. I'm sure people are going to come and join, so I may have to repeat some of this, but so I'm officially going to welcome everybody to our first Playlist for Learning Challenge Office Hours webinar, produced on behalf of the 6th Digital Media and Learning Competition, which is administered by Haystack with support from the MacArthur Foundation. I'm Cheryl Grant. I'm Director of Social Networking for the DML competition, and I'll be your host and moderating questions for the next 25-30 minutes or so. Before I introduce our guests, I want to let you know how you can participate and ask questions. If you can use the chat box in the Zoom platform and put your questions in there, Mandy is going to feed them to me in a different document that I'm looking at so that I can keep track of everything. So if you can go ahead and do it that way. And then if we need you to clarify your question, or if you really want to ask it directly, we can unmute you and you can pop in here and talk directly to everybody. Just to remind everybody, we do have a second office hour scheduled. That's going to be on April 27th, which is also going to be from 12 to 12:30 p.m. Any badge people out there, I'm very sorry. I know this happens with the Open Badges community call that takes place on Wednesdays at noon, so apologies for the cross-scheduling there. We also have, I think it's going to be a very interesting webinar with Tim and Gurley on next Wednesday, the 20th, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about playlist design and badges. We'll be talking about that for an hour, and that will be a webinar. Mandy, if you want to drop that registration link into the chat for people. It should also have been in the email that just went out and a lot of the social media that's gone out about today. And then I just want to make one comment today. I know it's tempting for people to ask us or ask David or Jen or anybody if they have a good application, and we will not be doing that on our call today. We cannot provide specific feedback on individual proposals in process, but we can answer general questions about playlists and playlist design, the competition application process, terms and conditions, those kinds of things to clarify what is on the website. So just to remind you, and you may hear us say that again, and you don't want us to give you feedback because we are not the judges. So we'll start. Let me see if we do have some questions that came in ahead of time. So if we don't have any in the chat, I may start working my way through that. And as people ask questions, we can jump over to that as people need us to. So let me introduce who is joining us today on behalf of the competition and LRNG. We have Jen Humke, Senior Program Officer at the MacArthur Foundation. And we also have David Theo Goldberg, who's the director at UCHRI and the DML Research Hub and the DML competition at UC Irvine. We have Tim Cook, who's partner product manager at LRNG. And joining us today also is Gurley Dela Cruz, who's senior research associate at LRNG. So let's start off. I think, Jen, actually, this is probably a question for you. Can we point people to any research on the efficacy of playlists? And does MacArthur plan to fund any research on this topic?
You know, I might actually even defer to David about research related to playlists. So MacArthur, this is the last competition that MacArthur is supporting, and we're supporting projects that you all are applying for. And so we do not plan on supporting any additional research related to playlists. And I'm going to bump the first part of the question over to David because I think he probably has a better, being an academic himself, a better sense of the landscape.
There's nothing I know of, to be perfectly honest. I think it's, you know, I haven't seen anything really even on playlists with respect to music or, you know, other forms of cultural expression. So I can't say I know of anything. That's not to say it doesn't exist. Cheryl, have you seen anything? I can't say there's anything that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I have dug in, brought up my library skills from my library degree, tried to dig into it, but I think it's fairly new way of sequencing the size of the chunks of the content. Gurley is nodding her head, so I'm going to toss to you, and if you want to say anything about this, go ahead, Gurley.
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head right there, where it's fairly new, our approach to engaging youth in these sort of learning opportunities. But I think one of the things that here at LRNG we're trying to do is we're planning on doing some of the efficacy studies on our playlist moving forward, applying for research proposals, and just our efforts itself, just to see how they are actually improving youth lives. So maybe in about a year we'll have different answers.
And I'll mention as well, I think that, while the playlist name and sort of the digital framework for it is somewhat new, it does build on a rich history of conversations around learning pathways that's been happening over the last decade. I think for me, playlists are just sort of a segment in a learning pathway, and just a way to sort of order and connect local and digital learning opportunities to one another in a rich sequence. So if you're looking for research on the subject of playlists, I would start by actually thinking about learning paths and learning pathways.
There is, of course, some research on badging, which is related as a component of what it is we're requesting, but it's not badging related specifically to playlists. It's badging for learning, right? Mm-hmm. But it's obviously relevant.
And I would just add in the context of this competition that looking at the Connected Learning Research Agenda, the report that came out, is a great place to start, just to understand some of the bigger principles in play here, and interest-based, academically rooted learning for youth. So let's move on to our next question here. This one is for LRNG. Tim, I think this is probably going to land with you. Is there any way to port in content without having to go through the LRNG builder?
Right now, there is not. The platform doesn't have any sort of custom integrations built with any outside platforms. We do hope to build some additional tools in the not too distant future to allow for sort of the bulk creation of content that you could maybe sort of bulk upload via a CSV file, something like that, with all the appropriate fields filled out, excluding maybe some of the multimedia assets that would have to go in. But we do plan on building some tools to help expedite the content authoring process. Part of it is that there's not a huge incentive to build integrations because, as we just noted, playlist is such a new concept. There's not really an existing playlist format that we could sort of use to import external content into the platform. So it is very sort of custom in terms of the building process.
And I just want to add to this that our competitions tend to be very good at building the plane in flight when we do our innovative competitions. So often there's a very rich community that grows around these initiatives that we have. And so people who get involved in this are going to be working right alongside you to answer some of these questions. So the next question we have, and I'm just going to remind people that you can post your questions in chat. And we have some new people, I guess, that have joined. So I'm just going to mention again that we cannot give you direct feedback on your actual applications, but we can answer more general questions. And thank you to anybody. I'm not sure if the questions that I'm looking at have come from you or from people who have sent them over the web, but thanks for sending these really great questions. The next one, I'm actually not sure who this is best targeted to. I'll just ask it and you can chime in. This one, is it better for our organization to try and tie into schools or school district? Does this make our application more competitive?
I'd say it's impossible to answer that in the abstract.
Okay.
Right? I mean, obviously tying it into schools and school districts is a plus, but it's a plus only in some abstract sense. One cannot judge, what we don't know about the content that's being proposed, assessed against other content being proposed.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question is referring to the competition details on the details page. Organizations must scale connected learning resources and opportunities to a broader audience. Can you be more specific about what you mean by broad audience? How broad? That may actually go to the question about local and global.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and others can chime in. This question, I think, came up on the last webinar, the first webinar that we held. And it really sort of depends on your context. Scale could mean expanding to other, within your local community. It could mean expanding regionally. It could mean having reach nationally or globally. It just really depends, much like David was saying about the school, the question regarding schools is it really depends upon sort of where you're starting and who you're suggesting you're going to partner with, and what the community, what the nature of the communities are that you're planning on helping to connect.
Yeah, let me just supplement that by saying we're open, as we've always been in competitions, to a very broad range of proposals, of kinds of proposals, of the kinds of learning engaged that might be proposed by one. The scale would be relative to what it is that you're proposing, right? So we don't have a one-size-fits-all conception of scale at work. That's just not how this works.
Yeah, and I would also add that because we are at the very beginning of exploring this concept of playlists, we're looking for a good mixture of different types of projects that let us explore scale in different ways. So, yeah, just adding that.
Great, thanks, Jen and David. This is an interesting question. We do not necessarily, this is an applicant describing themselves, we do not necessarily prescribe to the concept of leveling up, at least in terms of badges. Our pedagogy is more about branching pathways and discovery. How important is the criteria to unlock opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a major criterion. The capacity to unlock opportunities for learning is at the heart of what learning should be about. And opportunities to learning, and also or for learning, that then enables learning, will also unlock opportunities in life, whatever those might be. And so it's one among other of key criteria that we would take into consideration.
And we know from our Badges for Lifelong Learning competition that this is a nut to crack that a lot of people are trying to sort out. But interesting question in the context of leveling up, certainly. We do have another question, and this may actually go back to the very first question. For someone who has never designed a playlist before, what resources are available to get me started? Can you point me towards some examples across the web? We do have exemplars that we have on our website under, I believe on the navigation does say exemplars. So there are some examples, but I think this might actually be referring to in practice. So Tim, that might be a question, or Gurley, that might be a question for the two of you.
We don't have, we have handbooks that we have developed for our existing partners in cities. We are, I'm trying to think, Tim, do we have anything available to the general public about exemplary playlists or how-to manuals?
I think that the partner handbook is definitely the primary resource there. We just
Right.
published a brand new version of it, and we'll be able to share that out with all the competition members.
Okay, yeah.
But the handbook walks through the design process, starting at the smallest unit of the XP, or the experience, which is a digital or local learning experience, and then building up into the sequence of the playlist and figuring out a badge. So it sort of has the entire design process sketched out in the handbook, at least one approach to the design process.
Yeah, I mean, even prior to that, one thing to think about as an applicant, as you're developing a proposal, is to try to think yourself into what a playlist would be. Even yeah, as a kind of experience, or as a cultural experience, even before you get to the learning proposal sort of component of it, which is obviously key. But playlists exist culturally in all kinds of domains, not least in music. And so think yourself into what a playlist in music amounts to, and then sort of try and abstract from that to thinking about how that would apply in the development of a playlist for a learning experience, and then turn to the likes of LRNG's playbook to figure out how you go from abstractly, I would love to have a playlist in X, Y, or Z, to, I would like to develop a playlist for learning. I mean, that would be the kind of, the how-to ABC of sort of thinking yourself into the development of a playlist.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody. And maybe this goes to this is probably a good place to bring in this question, piggybacking on what David was just saying. In the last webinar, the guest talked about co-designing playlists with youth. So what might an application that involves co-designing with youth be like? Are there any examples of how this has worked in practice? Anyone know?
Well, maybe I defer to Gurley or to Tim if they know, but I would have to, from my knowledge, from my limited knowledge about playlists, I can't think of an example of a playlist being designed with youth, aside from maybe what LRNG is doing right now. There are all kinds of examples of learning activities being designed with youth, and I would maybe suggest you look to those examples.
And if this question is asking about the application process, I guess you, David, maybe you can add to this. I'm guessing if the proposal says we will co-design, then scaffolding that so that the judges can understand how you would want to approach that will probably be what your proposal foregrounds. Do you want to add anything to that, David?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you want to say, who are the youth you're engaging with? What is it that you're trying to develop as a learning experience with them and in relation to them, if not for them? What is the learning experience you might get from engaging with them? I mean, the learning goes in multiple directions over here, right? When it's not a top-down consideration. As we know from connected learning considerations. So all those things have come into play. The other thing I would stress is what Jen Humke started out by saying at the outset, which is this is really new, and we're all in this together, figuring out how this is going to work. And so if you come up with a really creative way of engaging youth, right, in the conception of and then the development of a playlist for learning, that would be really interesting. And I think we would all take that seriously.
One of the things we're doing at LRNG are working closely with youth advisory councils as we are developing our playlists, both just having them review things as we create them, as well as we're moving toward having them actually identify resources or potential media that could be used once they get familiar with the playlist themselves. So that might be a potential approach to doing so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. That you don't want to be developing a playlist for youth learning where the youth tell you it sucks, right? That really doesn't work. It's awful. I can't stand it. I'm never going to engage it, and so on. So you really want to be engaging with young folk
right
to
away.
determine what moves them. I mean, it's a common sense kind of understanding.
Great.
That's exactly right.
Here's a question that has come in during our office hours here. This is coming from a teacher. As a veteran teacher with an original curriculum / playlist and a connection to an educational technology company, but without any prior grant proposal experience, is there something I should know about my eligibility? My teaching position may change to another school in the next several months.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting sort of situation to be in. The fact that your teaching situation will change to another school, I think, is not especially important. The grant could obviously travel with you if you are the PI, so you could take it from one school to another. You want to be mindful in the proposal that you're not tying it to the school you're at as a consequence, because the school might want to claim sort of ownership over it. If you do, and obviously it's then relevant to that school rather than something that you could move. And in any case, it would stand a better chance if it had a kind of mobility about it, right? That it were applicable across different schools or a school district and so on. The other thing I would recommend, just in thinking about my own history of grant writing and so forth, is you might want to be talking with somebody who's had some experience, if not considerable experience, in grant writing, in how you write a proposal, the kinds of things to be mindful about, and so on. And they're bound to be people, even in your current school, who've had that kind of experience, and to engage them, even as a partner in the proposal writing sort of component of it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the Connected Learning Research Agenda is a great document to go through and use sort of as a checklist as you go through it if you're hitting all those principles.
Let me just qualify and say, somebody who's had successful grant writing experience, right?
Right. Great. I do have a double-barreled question here for Tim, I think. Or Gurley on behalf of LRNG. What happens to my organization's content after the close of the grant term, and does it stay on LRNG in perpetuity?
Yeah, so I think that we worked out a plan there. I don't remember exactly the full length of the grant term, but I believe the plan was that anyone who gets the competition award, then you'll also get an award from LRNG, which is essentially a free account to use on the platform to publish your DML competition content, but also any other content, and use the rest of the account features as well for the duration of the award. And I think we said something like 18 months after. At that point, if you decide to not continue to use the LRNG platform, you won't have a free account, but we will continue to publish your content for you on the sort of global LRNG feed.
And can you unpack that a little bit, Tim? Does that mean so the content staying up is not the same as having an account? So having an account would give them access to what?
Yeah, so I think by giving you a free account, you have access to all of the account features, the ability to create groups of youth, to create new additional content beyond the content you're creating for the DML competition, to publish featured landing pages, right? All the different functionality that we're building as part of the LRNG platform. And so if you don't have an account, then you wouldn't be able to do anything beyond just sort of editing and publishing the single content that you have created for the competition.
Great. And go ahead, David.
I was just going to add that the competition award is for 9 months, so the development period is 9 months. So effectively, you'd have free LRNG capacity for over 2 years, 2.25 years.
Exactly, which is quite a long time. And after that point, if you decide to not have an account, we'll still give you access to an account where your content will be stored in case you need to update it or tweak or republish things just for the DML content.
And I want to add, for people who did not see Tim's most recent demo, that is also, maybe Mandy, it's on our DML competition site. We're about to build a resources page so that people can find our office hours and webinars, but Tim also did a webinar that walks people through the platform, which is handy when you're putting your playlist together and want to think about how you're going to use their builder. And then next week also we'll be talking about badges and playlists as well. So there'll be ample opportunities to talk a little bit about how things are going to actually work on the platform. The next question is sort of related. Who retains intellectual property rights for content posted to LRNG?
So I think we got this question last time, and there's two answers to it. One answer I have, and the other you guys might have. So content published on the LRNG platform is owned by the authors. But I think there might be some requirements as part of the DML competition in terms of what license you publish content under. I know we got the question last time. I don't know if you guys have any more specificity there.
Yeah, people do retain their own IP, as Tim mentions. Creative Commons license, the most open version of it. And you could go into the question page of the competition and find responses to all those questions.
And we just got a question from our live audience. For the grant recipient, does the playlist become proprietary to LRNG?
I think that's the same as the last question, and that the authors own their own content, not proprietary to LRNG, but you can share it out with a Creative Commons license for other people to use if you want.
Yeah.
And that we actually encourage that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, one more question here. We have about 3 more minutes. And just to remind people, we will have another office hours on April 27th at the same time, as well as a webinar next Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time with Tim and Garalee to talk about badges and playlist design. This question is, I think that this has already been answered, but just in case I'm missing a nuance, what if we develop more playlists after the competition? Can we add those to the LRNG platform if we choose?
Yes. So your account will just be a fully functioning account on the platform. You can publish 1,000 playlists on there if you wanted to. Yeah. So it's open to use for any content type. And
so if people come up with more playlist ideas than they were originally set out to be funded for, is that anything that people need to be concerned about? Should I rephrase that?
Concerned about how?
People were to apply and suggest 5 playlists, and in so doing things, they come up with 10. Is that a problem for adding them to the platform?
No, I would say the only sort of primary difference is that, so in terms of the publishing scope on the platform, accounts generally have the ability to publish content either just to a very local scope, to a city, or to sort of the national scope. I think obviously the plan for the DML competition is that all awarded content will be published nationally if it makes sense for that content, unless there's a winner who only wants their stuff published at the local level. I would say any content that's in addition to the content that was awarded would maybe have to be a case-by-case basis as to whether or not the LRNG team sort of thought it was of the quality to also be published nationally, or it would just be published locally to that organization or to their city.
Great. We're just about to hit 12:30 here. We have one more question that I think is probably all we're going to have time for. So I'll ask this. Does adding new resources or connected learning experiences that we have not done before make our application more or less competitive?
I think we'll remain agnostic about that. I mean, we would have to see what they look like, of course. So it could go either way. It in and of itself, abstractly, would not affect the consideration. It depends on the quality one way or the other.
Great. Well, we are at 12:30. If you have other questions, for those of you listening, please join us April 27th from 12 to 12:30 for our next office hours featuring the same crew. This wraps up our webinar on our office hours on Playlist for Learning. And if you want to follow us, please do so in the hashtag DML playlist on Twitter. And we look forward to talking to everybody in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.